Good afternoon. We're here for a workshop. And we'll start with Lincoln Jeffers, an update on the Lewiston-Auburn passenger rail service.
Well, wonderful, thank you. I'm here to basically provide an update on something that started back in 2015 when Jared Colden and the Lewiston-Auburn delegation were able to secure funding to do a study for expansion of rail up to this area and to see whether it was possible. The two questions to be asked was really, what is the demand for rail in this area? And if warranted, how should the service be designed? What rail lines could be used? And what would be the cost to upgrade the line so that it would be competitive? Doing this will put us in good stead if and when federal funding becomes available to expand rail. So this is really a step needed. Both cities put $50,000 into helping fund this study. Originally, we thought that $250,000 would all be done in one fell swoop, but it did get bifurcated. So we really said, let's first determine if there is demand, and if there is demand warranted at that point, we'll do the second phase of the study. The first phase has been completed, which I'll give you a quick summary of it here, and we have embarked on phase two. By putting the $50,000 in, we did get a seat at the table overseeing this study. VSB was determined after a competitive bidding process. VSB is who was chosen as the consultant. Representing Lewiston are myself, Richard Grandmason, and Jared Golden on the committee. And then for Auburn, it's Jonathan Labonte, Bob Stone, and Betty Ann Sheets, who's a legislator out of Auburn. Patricia Quinn is representing the Northern New England Passenger Rail Authority. There's a representative from DOT as well, and really the contract is between NEPRA and VHP. I've got to say, phase one of the study was pretty challenging because there's really no direct comparisons when you look around the country. Rail tends to go in places where you've got a fairly sizable populations. Lewiston and Auburn combined are about 60,000 people. Portland's about 65,000 people on the peninsula. When you take a look at the larger geography, we're about 250, 300,000 people in the Portland-Lewiston area. But that's typically at 750,000 and up is when rail starts making sense. As they looked at other systems around the country, the one that was probably closest as far as scale was the Ethan Allen Express, which runs from Rutland, Vermont, over to Albany, and then runs south to New York City. It's a 240-mile corridor. There's 12 stations along it. The population basis for even those 12 stations is only 60,000 people, and they only do one trip per day. So that's really not a direct comparison, but again, it was very challenging, and that's the one that was closest. Ridership on that is about 368 daily riders. Other things, we don't have the big population. The cities are also only 30 miles apart, and there are good road connections. Portland and Lewiston-Auburn are distinct labor markets, although there is some interaction between the two, with more people commuting from LA down to Portland. But that's a lot of what this propensity study was looking at, is just how many people are going back and forth. And another question was, should we focus on intercity travel, which is just a handful of trips a day, similar to the Ethan Allen Express, going from the Lewiston-Auburn area to Portland, and then from Portland on to Boston, and really making a connection. We would basically be a connector from here to try to take advantage of the Downeaster service. Or should it really be more of a commuter rail where you've got quite a few more trips on a daily basis, and people really could live downtown, hop on the train, get to Portland, walk to work, take a bus, take Uber, take a bus to get to work. So it was really evaluating those two things. Putting together the propensity analysis, this study group helped determine the catchment area. VSB was really looking to keep it pretty close to Lewiston-Auburn. We encouraged them to look as far east as Waterville, far north as Farmington, and west to Rumford. So it's a much larger area where those folks, rather than driving away to Portland if they wanted to get on a train, they could drive here and then connect. VHB also looked at the travel patterns and study reports, everything that was available from DOT, the census, and the Main Turnpike Authority for travel patterns in the region and how they've been changing. They interviewed major potential traffic generators such as the Bates College, both of the hospitals, TD Bank, and other large businesses locally. They had 2 public meetings. I will say the interest in Portland, 28 people came out. In Lewiston, 90 people came out. There was quite a bit of interest here. They also had an online survey that was on the NEPRA website to gauge public interest. And really what it came down to, and really the findings as to what people use rail for, it's primarily for leisure purposes. It's for going shopping, going sightseeing, making travel connections, or attending sporting or cultural events. There was really no surprise there for NEPRA because all of the studies they have done since the Downeaster came into play, it's the same reasons people ride from Portland to Boston. You know, there is some commuting, but it's still a relatively small part of their ridership. VHB also noted that economic development tends to be attracted to rail. The projects that they referenced in Old Orchard Beach were 2 hotels that totaled about $20 million in investment. In Saco, their Island Point project, which is a redevelopment of a former textile mill that's located right by the train station, that's going to be a $110 million project when it's done. In Portland, there's Thompson's Point. In Brunswick, there was a $30 million hotel, retail, office, and residential development that's right by the train station in downtown Brunswick. Having walkable downtowns both in Lewiston-Auburn, the proximity of Bates Mill, Bates College, and the hospitals really suggests that if rail does come, that LA would benefit from additional economic and residential development that's proximal to rail. So if there's enough riders to make this work, it will result in new tax base for the area. What makes rail work is that it needs to be close to the point of departure or destination. There needs to be a relatively high frequency of service. It should cost less than driving or parking, and it needs to be competitive as far as the time frame to travel to a destination. After doing all of these studies, analysis, conversations, really evaluating how it's worked elsewhere in the country, using the shorter, just 4 city trips, 4 intercity style trips per day, they recommend early on that we would see 210 to 240 daily trips. And if they stayed with just offering 4 intercity style trips, they could grow to 250 to 300 trips per day by 2040. You can see how frequency really plays into this, though. If they increase the frequency so it really could serve as a commuter connection to Portland and beyond, that in the near term it could be as many as 600 to 800 daily trips if they had 12 to 20 trips per day, and it could grow to from 700 to 1,900 trips per day by 2040. With this as the background, it was really determined that there really is enough demand to warrant further study, so we've started on the next steps, which is to look at where the service should go and what it would likely cost and how to put it all together. About 3 weeks ago, I took a day trip and drove the rail lines from the exit 75 over in Auburn all the way down to Portland. We looked at both alignments of the St. Lawrence and Atlantic and of the Main Central Railroad line. The big question, I think, both for Lewiston, but even more so in Portland, is the last mile. St. Lawrence and Atlantic, on paper it looks great. Gosh, it would come over, it would hit India Street on the eastern side of Portland. It would be walking distance to a lot of businesses right in the heart of downtown Portland. On the downside, there has not been a rail line from B&M Baked Beans into downtown Portland, and I don't know the time frame, but probably 50, 60, 70 or more years. Their old rail corridor that runs right along the Eastern Prom is turned into a great recreation area. There's parks there. You've also got very high-end homes sitting above that park, looking out on the water. They probably would not be particularly excited about having a train running by their front door on a regular basis. So just the politics of that, and really changing, the character of that end of Portland dramatically. So that's one, as well as the cost of making that bridge connection over the bay by B&M Baked Beans. That would be very expensive. The Central Maine Railroad connection is great. It's already operating. It would require some upgrades, but it is a functioning line. But that creates conflicts with freight. It also drops people in Portland. If you're trying to use a commuter service where that last mile, you're sort of out in the middle of nowhere in Portland. It's a long walk across busy roads over the Fore River. I'm not sure how good bus service is there. You could take Uber, you could take taxi, but neither of these options is particularly good. But that's what the study is now embarked on, is trying to really evaluate pros and cons of each and what the likely costs would be. In a nutshell, that's where we're at with the study, and just wanted to open it up to questions at this point.
So I got a little confused when you were quoting the numbers, because you kept saying trips, and in some instances you were talking about hundreds of trips, and in some instances you were talking about 10 to 20 trips. So I'm wondering, when we're talking about the hundreds, did you mean to say something other than trips?
Passenger. Excuse me.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So the number of trips per day, how many trains are run each day?
Yes.
Is that either 4 or 12 to 20? The actual riders was the 210 to 240. So sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Next steps, I know you said you're in phase 2, but when do you expect that to be completed, and when will you be back in front of us to make
I will have to catch up with VHB. We're meeting on a monthly basis. We have another meeting next week. I was just trying to set it up today so we can actually tour the Central Maine Railroad station here and see if that's even a viable option. It's currently the Royal Oak Room in Royal Oak, not Royal, let's see, forget the second name for it, but Royal Oak Room was the old train station. So we'll be taking at least a look at that for options in Lewiston for where a rail could land. It could be as soon as March, but the study, as most studies are, generally takes longer than you think it is to come out with the full recommendations. But latest I saw was we could have a complete study by March.
I just wanted to ask, so thank you for referencing the folks who did the survey and came out to meetings. Will there be future public forums to deliver this information, or I imagine you're not seeking input on this part anymore, but.
Well, when this does have the full-blown study, what I just summarized for, here's the propensity analysis, how many riders there will be, that will be put in a larger public forum, as well as here's how we can make this happen, and to get public feedback. So I do expect that'll happen.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, I'm on the Railroad Board of Directors. That's different from the passenger rail study.
You're up.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I think you're all aware we're going to have a new legislature starting up here in January. I think we will have our own representative from the city of Lewiston. It's going to get us everything we've ever wanted.
All your dreams coming true.
She's promised it all.
And I would anticipate sometime in December that we try to get together with the newly elected legislative delegation to talk about issues important to the city of Lewiston. In your packet, I basically pulled together some of the stuff that some organizations, municipal organizations, are looking at. Either the Legislative Policy Committee of Maine Municipal Association or the Mayor's Coalition. And before we actually sat down with the elected representatives, I thought it would be useful for us to go over this to see which of these items the council would be supportive of, and or if there's anything that's not included on this list that we would like to add. Probably the easiest way to do this is to go through them one by one. The first item on the first set of issues is from the Maine Municipal Association. Revenue sharing, I don't think it comes as anybody's surprise that that would be the #1 issue that Maine Municipal is interested in pursuing. They are looking at trying to at least start by asking that it be fully funded starting in the next fiscal year. I don't think anybody expects that to actually happen, because as I recall, that's $120 million or so to get back to the 5% because we're now at 2%. But that's one of their strong efforts coming out of the Maine Municipal Association. We've traditionally been supportive of trying to protect revenue sharing, so I would anticipate that would be something we would support. The homestead exemption, there are some folks who have been pushing to continue to expand the homestead exemption. I know that Senator Libby has spoken about that. And there are a number of alternatives that Maine Municipal is looking at. One is to increase the exemption from 20% to $20,000 to $25,000. There's also proposals to increase, tied in with this, the percentage of reimbursement. We right now get 62.5% back. Taking that to 67% or even to 100%. There's also some discussion of requiring at least a minimum payment from everyone. Right now, even at the $20,000 level, we have a significant number of people in the community that have no property tax bill, largely mobile home owners. So there's some discussion of having something there. So there's a whole series of potential ways that that could be pursued. I will point out that some communities are not terribly fond of the homestead exemption because if you are almost 100% residential, you have a much bigger impact on the tax rate. So you do get the 62% back, but you still have your tax rates going up more than in a city like we are, where a significant portion of your tax base isn't homestead property. It's either industrial, commercial, or apartment rental. So my suggestion there might be to, I know Senator Libby's going to propose something, is maybe asking him to present what he's thinking on that issue. Local option sales tax. This is talked about a lot over the years. It never has gotten very far. On a couple of occasions, it's gotten close. A number of years ago, it actually got out of committee in the House, and I think last year it was pretty close to getting out of committee. This is primarily being driven by the Mayor's Coalition. What they're proposing is up to 1% to be used for whatever the municipality wants to use it for. By vote of the legislative body. Nobody anticipates that that's actually what might happen. That's a starting negotiating chip, because in the past there's always been issues about whether it should be voted by the public, whether it's shared in some way with other groups through either the revenue sharing formula or maybe the county getting a portion of it. But that is something that I know that the Mayor's Coalition in particular is supporting. MMA is also supporting it kind of as a, well, if you're not going to give us revenue sharing, you have to give us something, so that we're not quite as property tax dependent.
I'd be more interested in a local option income tax. As a service community that doesn't have many sales outlets, but we hire a lot of people that come in from outside communities for their jobs.
You're right. That would be much more beneficial to us. I think there has been a lot of caution about approaching that because income tax has been such a hot button issue statewide. But you're right. It would be more beneficial to us for having a local income tax and a sales tax.
It'd be more beneficial to a sister city for obvious reasons.
Correct. Property tax relief for seniors. The state used to have a program where if you income qualified, the state would actually pay your taxes and put a tax lien on your property and effectively collect it when the property was sold. So it was primarily aimed at elderly homeowners with limited incomes. That program seemed to work pretty well. There was a lot of discussion in the last session around property tax foreclosures on this one individual family. So this is kind of a proposal to try to bring that back under this program. The state would, if you qualified and were entered into the program, the state would pay your taxes, so you would receive the payment. Then the state would put a lien on the property that would be collected at the time the property was sold. State aid for education and property tax relief. This is a bill that basically says if at the end of the session the state decides to throw more money at education, it has to be used for property tax relief. Some schools have not done that. They've used it for other purposes. You know, we have tried to deal with that here locally through our appropriation resolve for the school department, but this would actually put it in state law.
So Lewiston's already doing this. I was like, how does this?
Well, we are kind of doing it. I mean, there has been an escape clause in our language, which has allowed the school department to spend some of the money on emergency purposes, for emergency purposes.
Okay. Would this not even allow that?
This would not allow that. Adult use marijuana tax revenue. As you know, the state has decided that municipalities aren't deserving of any tax revenue from marijuana sales. This would share 25% of the excise and sales tax from recreational marijuana sales back to the host municipality. Utilities and right-of-way. This gets to be a little bit of a more complicated issue, but it's enough to drive you crazy. As we go to 5G cell service, we are going to have mini cells, small cell. In fact, you may have seen one. There's one right outside of Simona's on the telephone pole. Right outside of that, it's a small cell booster. Right now, they're using it for the 4G system, and they are installing those in areas of high demand because they can't keep up with the demand off their main tower. So it's kind of an ancillary servant subsystem. When we go to 5G, the whole system is going to be based on small cell. What that means is that every cell provider will have to have one of those installations on a telephone pole somewhere between every 350 and 1,000 feet. So if you have 5 providers, you're going to have 5 of these things in every 1,000 foot area. Right now,
Sounds like political science.
and the telecommunications industry is pushing very hard to basically have free right to access the right-of-way with no municipal payment. The FCC has gotten into this, and they've gotten some standards for what is a reasonable amount to pay that they considered reasonable both for the initial installation and an annual fee to be in the municipal right-of-way. In Maine, we wouldn't get anything right now because we don't have it. Public utilities have free right of access to the right-of-way. In other states, there are franchise fees, other kinds of fees that are paid by those providers. In addition, theoretically, because we're allowing their poles in our right-of-way, municipalities are supposed to have a space on the poles for municipal use. That's not always working out the way it's supposed to work out, and municipalities are finding it difficult to access some of these poles and are being charged for them. So basically what this legislation would attempt to do is, number one, clarify the municipal right to be on poles for municipal purposes. That would not include broadband service, but it would include other things, for example, like the wires that we use to interconnect our traffic signals or to interconnect public buildings where we wire people into our system. I mean, we have one now that runs all the way out to our solid waste facility. It would also allow us to have some kind of reasonable charge for access to the right-of-way, recognizing that there are certain costs associated with having the utility poles and utility installations in the municipal right-of-way. So basically, that's what that effort is trying to do. Right now, Maine law is not very helpful to the municipal situation. It's not very clear in some instances what we can and can't do. For example, it's not totally clear how we should deal with the telephone pole that's right in the middle of the sidewalk that blocks ADA, that's been there for the last 40 years. So it's an issue, it's a big issue, and it's going to become, I think, an even bigger issue as 5G starts coming in and we start seeing these things pop up everywhere. Also irritates me a little bit, we can charge if they put one of those installations on a city-owned pole. Okay, so where we own a pole, they can limit the charge. The FCC wants to tell us how much we can charge for that. Now, they're not telling the private company that has a pole how much they can charge for an installation on their pole, but they want to tell us how much it can. Just gets a little bit irritating sometime. Plus, some of the legislation that the companies are pushing, it makes them, they have no liability, it's all our fault. It's just enough to drive you crazy. But anyway, that's a whole big issue that I think is going to have to be dealt with.
And so this list is things that the Maine Municipal Association might see coming to the
Yes.
forefront. Are there legislators who have expressed intent in like submitting legislation on these, or I'm just
There
trying
has-
to.
So every year the delegation comes and we talk to them about things we might want them to submit
Oh, okay.
legislation about.
So they
these
might-
are our ideas.
Okay, I was like,
And-
where are
and-
we in this process? Thank you.
Yeah, and the Maine Municipal Association normally recruits legislators to sponsor
Okay.
their legislation.
Helpful context.
I know that in the last session, there was a telecommunications company bill that was submitted to deal with this issue from the point of view of the utility companies, which basically said that they can do whatever they want, wherever they want, and it's never their fault if the pole falls over and kills someone. So, that you got to be aware that there are other groups out there who are pursuing alternative approaches to these things. County inmate health costs. It appears that in some counties, the jails are sending medical bills for prisoners back to the arresting community. We haven't seen that here, but apparently it's happening in some other places. In addition, when people are incarcerated, they lose their health insurance if they're on main care, for example. So then that bill becomes responsibility of the counties. So this is an effort to clarify to allow Medicaid eligibility and actually main care eligibility for incarcerated individuals, and to make sure that there are ways for people who are in jail to continue that coverage while they're in jail so that it doesn't fall on the county to pay the medical bill or on the arresting municipality. Opioids, this is an issue that's probably higher on the Mayor's Coalition list. There was a grant program a couple of years ago that provided funding to communities, and some communities received that funding to try pilot programs to address specific ways to try to deal with people who are addicted. One case that's mentioned here is Biddeford-Saco, where they actually have a case manager who follows up on all of their overdose situations and situations where they're aware of addicts to try to get those folks into contact with some form of treatment. There are other programs that have been tried. There's been some effort in the past to get funding for programs in county jails that would be of assistance to try to deal with the addiction problem. So basically, this is just, I think, more a placeholder for some specific action, but recognizing that funding is needed for those kinds of programs, municipally based programs, and also for more treatment options in the state, because that tends to be a problem that we consistently run into, is finding places for people to be treated. Public transportation simply makes the point, this is again a Mayor's Coalition item.
Excuse me,
Yes,
Mr. Mayor.
Jim?
Yeah, Ed. With respect to the opioid issue, I know, talking to Planning and Code, that they would love to see the state regulate recovery residences where we have an issue. I mean, we often fall back on, well, if it's licensed by the state, they follow that
Yep.
criteria, you can get permission, and we can factor it into our zoning. So I think that I've heard some interest about people, but that might be a way of kind of short-circuiting the process we may have to go into to allow, and making sure that we're not violating ADA requirements and things like that, if the state would take that on. And obviously, what people need is a residence to take them out of the addiction culture and allow them to get treatment, allow them to get access to mental health services and whatever they need, but they need a safe place, a recovery residence.
Yeah, there is an issue we've been talking about with code. Group homes generally are licensed by the state. And if you are a group home licensed by the state, we have provisions in our ordinance that pretty much automatically exempt you from some of the single-family limitations, recognizing that you have to accommodate folks with disabilities. But that also kicks in somewhat higher fire code standards. Once you have a group home with 8 or more residents, you have to have, I think, a sprinkler system. You have to have a higher level, you probably know better than I do, a higher level of fire separation, things like that in a residence. We don't have any system like that right now for recovery houses. We would most likely probably have to provide an exemption from the single-family limits on number of people in a residence because of the ADA. But either we're going to need to adopt some specific regulations that would kick in at a certain level for those kinds of operations, or if the state had it already, then it would fall under our existing ordinances.
Thank you.
So can we add that piece to this?
Yes.
Thanks.
Public transportation, the state spends very little on public transportation. I think that's a problem in terms of things like bus replacement and support for our public transit system. So we would like to see more state funding there. I think that particularly becomes the case if we want to continue to explore ways to regionalize our public transit system and to tie into some of the plans and efforts of Western Maine Transportation to create a public transportation system that literally would extend from Kingfield or the ski areas around Bethel all the way down to Brunswick. Municipal infrastructure. Over the years, we have tried on a number of occasions and once in a while been successful in getting state bond funding to help support things like waterfront or downtown revitalization. There's also needs for water systems, CSO sewage systems. So there's all kinds of municipal infrastructure needs. So that's just another thing that the Mayor's Coalition is interested in. And then workforce development has been a big issue with the Mayor's Coalition, particularly around continuing technical education, trying to find more ways to improve that element of the education system so that we have a feeder system into some of the areas of our economy that we know can't be offshored very easily, like plumbing and electrical work and things like that. So that's another thing that the Mayor's Coalition has been pushing. So those are the issues that I'm aware of that people are talking about moving toward the next session. Certainly there may be other issues that we ought to also have on our list.
Councilor West.
Yeah, on the transportation issue, last week we had a safe walking and pedestrian-focused transportation thing. So I think that, I mean, I look at public transportation as, both the, eventually hopefully rail and bus, and but also, the bicycle pedestrian systems throughout this area too, and they're talking about ramping up both education and enforcement, which I think makes some sense. And one of the things that confuses me is that, you read the rules of the road one time when you take your exam, when you're 18 or 21 or whatever, and you don't visit those, and things have changed and whatever. People just don't know what their responsibilities are, both as a pedestrian and as a motorist or a bicyclist. I think there should be a focus on that. And interesting enough, their first workshop that they had here was because of the couple deaths we had on Lisbon Street. They are now going statewide. So they've got, I think, a focus on, how do we make our roads much more complete in a way, but also as safe for our people who are getting places in other than automobiles. But people who have automobiles need to be safe too and understand what the rules are.
It also ties into, probably in January, we will be coming to you folks with the results of the pedestrian study that we've been working on and identifying some priority areas where some improvements are needed. That study is going to have a pretty significant price tag to it. So, again, funding for those kinds of things would be important. Other things on people's mind that we should have on our list, or anything on this list you think we shouldn't have on the list?
So, I know maybe it's not considered a legislative issue these days, but main care expansion, I think, is something that that some of us want to continue to keep a focus on. It seems it will be a priority of the new administration. That ties into, I would also like to see that tied into the county inmate health care issue. As that gets expanded, maybe they should look at how people who are incarcerated, people in Maine do not lose their right to vote. Why should they lose their right to have health insurance? It just doesn't make sense to me. And then someone else be charged to it. So that should be covered. Because obviously if people are incarcerated, they can't work, and their income drops significantly if they had been working. So, but I mean, that's something we need to keep an eye on. I think it would also help our two hospital systems a lot by expanding, getting more people covered. And since this area depends on medical, a medical component of our industrial base, I think it's going to be a boon to our hospitals and healthcare agencies that are here.
So the the representatives-elect and the senators-elect are meeting with the school committee next week.
Yes.
So I think we should probably, in our conversation with them, in our council conversation with the delegation, it would be helpful, I think, for the council to hear what the school committee's requests are as well, since we talked about being sort of more collaborative.
I think it's December 4th or something.
Okay.
No,
No.
it's not. It's next week.
Is it next week?
I need a date. Sorry, I don't have it.
The 4th is a Tuesday.
December 3rd.
It's the 28th at 5:30.
I don't know that that's been shared with the school committee yet. Or I
I'm
missed
pretty
it,
sure
which
it
is
has.
entirely possible. Were you asking, sorry, I missed the rest of your question.
I was just saying that when the council sits down to meet with the delegation, we should know what the school committee is
Right.
making for the requests as well.
Oh, okay.
I'll ask the school superintendent to share that with us.
Excellent.
Anything else?
You're off the
Okay.
hook.
Okay, so I'll try to set something up with the delegation for either the first or second week in December.
It will not be the week of December 3rd, I can tell you that.
Won't be?
No.
So 14th? Or
Yes.
what is it?
The 10th, the
The
week of
11th?
the 11th or the 18th.
Yeah.
The 11th.
11, 18, 25.
Why don't we tentatively shoot then for the 11th, and I'll let Nate know.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to go into executive session pursuant to MRSA Title 1, Section 4056A, to discuss personnel matter regarding the search for a new Public Works Director.
All in favor? Okay.
Check with Bill on that.
Is it just with the legislative?
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. We're going to start off the meeting tonight with a little recognition. Our boys soccer team for the second year in a row, and the third time in 4 years, came home with a little bit of hardware, which I see they brought with us. State champions again. Congratulations, guys.
Yeah, really.
Regular season record 12-0-2, and only allowed 6 goals all season, and not one during the entire playoffs. So, Coach McGraw, I notice you have some gentlemen here with you. Congratulations. A great season. I have some certificates for you, and thank you very much. Again, congratulations, guys, and I expect to see you here next year for 3. Okay, the hockey team's been here 3 years in a row. You gotta step it up. And next, we will get an update from the Lewiston Youth Advisory Council President.
As a part of LEAC's ongoing Shine on Lewiston series, we decided to focus on the Lewiston Police Department. LEAC member Zach Morton shared with the group that he doesn't believe that people always know what all the officers do, and told us about his personal positive observations about Officer Matt Beerling. We brainstormed as a group and decided to hold a forum where we can bring awareness as to how the Lewiston Police Department consistently contributes to our community. We want to highlight what encompasses the role of a police officer and provide an opportunity for residents to learn about their passions and experiences. As a result, on November 28th, the Youth Council will host a Police Insider True Blue, with a panel of police officers answering questions from LEAC members and responding to a Q&A. This event will start at 7 p.m. in Lewiston Council Chambers, 27 Pine Street, and is free and open to the public. Those from the police department participating will be Chief Barley O'Malley, Sergeant Carly Conley, Sergeant Roger Landry, and Officer Matt Beerling. To help promote the event, Zachary Morin and a fellow LEAC member, Hope Rubuto, will be doing a radio interview with the Big Z Breakfast Club on November 26th at 8. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Emma. Thank you. And now is public comment period for any member of the public wishing to comment on Lewiston City business on an item not on our agenda. Going once. Okay. Guess we're doing everything right. Roll call.
All roll call votes for this meeting will begin with the Council of Ward 5.
Okay, consent agenda.
Consent agenda. There are 3 items on the consent agenda this evening. Item number 1, adoption of City Council meeting schedule for January 2019. Number 2, resolve authorizing applying for and accepting a grant from the J.T. Gorman Foundation for the purpose of funding early action activities associated with the Choice neighborhood planning effort, and transferring $20,000 to support expansion of the downtown smart infrastructure strategy to the city as a whole. And number 3, authorization to accept transfer of forfeiture funds.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Councilor Cloutier, second by Councilor LaJoy. Call the roll.
Councilor from Ward 5,
Yes.
Ward 6,
Yes.
Ward 7,
Yes.
Ward 1,
Yes.
Ward 2,
Yes.
Ward 3,
Yes.
Ward 4.
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Item number 11.
Item number 11, resolve authorizing the transfer of $25,000 from the Lewiston High School parking lot project to the Visual and Performing Arts Wing project. Requested action, to adopt the resolve authorizing the transfer of $25,000 from the Lewiston High School parking lot project to the Visual and Performing Arts Wing project.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Councilor Ray, seconded by Councilor Lyson. I see Mr. Webster is here. Do we have any questions for Mr. Webster? Councilor Marcotte?
Last week, I didn't bring the subject up, but you made a quick reference to it. The so-called dungeon, as it was referred to.
I'm sorry?
The so-called dungeon, as it's referred to.
Yes, yes.
Has some ventilation issues that's been persistent for the last couple of years. And I think it goes over into the middle section of the school where the kitchen is, and I'm not sure if it's still where the chorus room was when I was there,
That would be the same room.
which has no windows. When you walk in the door, it's right there in front of you. I was wondering what's going to be done with that in the short term.
So there already is an LCIP that's been approved for some of those upgrades. With the staff turnover that we've had in facilities, we were not prepared to do anything of consequence this summer, but that is still on the to-do list, very much so.
If we could follow up with that later in the week as to which one of those items that you're referring to, because I was looking at those today.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Councilor Pettingill?
Not a question, just more of a statement. I was pretty vocal about being against the reallocation of it as far as the addition to the classrooms. As much as I don't like it, I do see the need for our students. I would like to see future thought put into increasing the amount of art in our schools and the presence of that in there. As I was discussing with Councilor Ray, the issue of overcrowding in our schools is something that needs to be addressed, but it shouldn't come at the detriment to adding the arts and music to our schools. It goes a long way to building character and bettering our city and our community to give these kids access to arts and music and everything that comes with that. So if that's something that can be on the radar, for the remainder of the school year, future superintendents, things like that, it'll benefit everybody in the long run.
Well put.
Thank you.
Okay, to the public? All right, back to the city council.
I just wanted to echo what Zach had to say. I mean, it was eloquent and important. And sometimes negative votes can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. It's not him in particular, I think, often, will not side with an issue, but really in a larger context agrees with the issue. So I think sometimes we've got to look at that. And certainly the arts is something that is critically important to people's critical thinking, and I think that's really the most important aspect of education, is developing that critical thinking. And some of the work that I've seen come out of the schools has been amazing, and some of the talents that are there. And I think that also the parents understand how important that is too. They see that within their students. Not everybody is going to be an athlete, so there's ways of expressing yourself and understanding the complexities of the world through better critical thinking. And I think, this is one of those ways that is, I think, often misunderstood and underrated and extremely important. Yeah, pardon me? Overlooked, yeah. So thank you.
Councilor Marcotte?
Yeah, I don't disagree that the arts needs a more prominent place in our school system. However, when I look at some of the numbers here, and some of the numbers that weren't mentioned at last week's meeting, such as the LCIP has $6 million in 2021, and actually I think that was $2 million, and $6 million in 2023 earmarked for this project. And I heard the chair of the Finance Committee mention that it was initially proposed to be $30 million, and no mention of the $13 million that I've heard since, as far as what this project would cost. And the handout tonight, not sure which option or version this is, but it looks like it's probably the $30 million version from the layout. My concerns here are multifold, that we've already spent $60,000 that we have to add to because we inserted a parking lot that makes the requirement for some changes in the architectural design, apparently. I'll skip around. Can't even read my own handwriting here, but this morning when I pick up the paper and read about the dysfunction that's going on, I'm not sure that I have confidence moving forward with some of what is being laid out there. And when you consider that a few years back we spent roughly $13 million on the facade of the middle school, and we had to breach our ordinance on paying down our debt, which has taken at least 5 years and probably about 2 or 3 years more even to break even. And here we are looking at and facing another $13 million on the Lewiston taxpayers' dime. This city can't afford it. We haven't progressed in the last 5 years economically in this community in order to be able to afford it. So I think we need to address some of those issues first. And yeah. And I just don't want to green light it at this point in time. I think we really need to wait and see where we're going to be after the next budget season, because all of our budget seasons are tight. We actually breached that last year. We kept it under 100%, thank goodness, but we didn't meet our goal of 80%. And that goal of 80% is what we really needed to get back to break even over the course of about 8 years. So that's why I'll be not supporting this tonight.
So if I could just add a little more information to some of the issues that Mr. Marquardt mentioned. Part of the $25,000 will be used to get an accurate cost estimate. This is, if you look at the first page, the cover page of what you've had, this is not the $30 million project. You can see the future 1,000 seat performance auditorium. That is mapped out there, but that's not what this project is. It is the plan that you see before, and then more detail for the first and second floor. A rough estimate, this may be a $13 million plus or minus project. It's certainly of that magnitude, not a $30 million. Still a very high number, obviously.
13 million seems to be on the low side of what I would expect, even for just a basic 2-story square brick building. And I thank you for making reference to the auditoriums in the graphic that was handed out. Are not part of this 13 million?
That is not part of this $13 million.
No, because that's what I was reacting to.
Yeah.
And the item that I couldn't read was concerning the fact that next year we'll be looking at 2 facilities that become vacant, and there's been no real discussion on what's going to happen to both of those facilities. I know that we weren't looking to give up the multi, and we haven't really made a decision on Martell School yet. And there's been other discussions about maintenance issues in the basement section of Dingley. And I think we're growing our infrastructure a little too fast for our ability to pay it back.
So I should mention that I anticipate that the school committee will be addressing the Martell School issue early in the new year, and then that would be communicated to the council. So I do anticipate that happening soon.
Okay.
Councilor Ray.
Thank you. So obviously, I have been privy to both sides of these conversations, but I appreciate what the councilors are raising at this moment. This is a reallocation, so it's not further funding going towards the school district, and there is reference in the superintendent's memo to the fact that there was that shared council and school committee meeting talking about what sort of debts and incomes exist on the city side and how that impacts the school committee side. And one thing I just wanted to make reference to and give credit to is it's come up at pretty much every school committee meeting since, that exact conversation about what the responsibilities of the city council are, and how that differs somewhat from school committee, given that there is a minimum required local share and what the tax burden looks like. So I just wanted to give credit where that is due, especially mentioning that in this memo and knowing what the landscape is overall to the superintendent. I also wanted to credit Mr. Dewey has stepped in and said some very thoughtful resonant things about this new, not new, but this direction that we're moving in, and how this iteration will serve the needs. And I believe that you as a teacher have the best ability to state that. So I really appreciate your participation in this, and just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
Okay. Call the roll.
Counselor from Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
No.
Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 6 to 1.
Agenda item,
And
actually.
Mr. Mayor, while we have the school superintendent here, earlier today, we were talking about legislative meeting with our newly elected legislators. There's a possibility we could do that jointly with the school committee, perhaps on December 11th, and I just wanted to raise that as a possibility, and so that would be an acceptable plan. Okay, we'll see if we can arrange that.
We'll
let you
move
know.
forward. I thank you very much.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 4.
Item number 4, public hearing on a new application for a new liquor license for Angelo's Pizza, 365 Savannah Street. Requested action to authorize the city clerk's office to approve a new liquor license application for Angelo's Pizza, 365 Savannah Street.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Counselor Lyson, seconded by Counselor Cloutier. Council. To the public. Back to the council, and call the roll.
Counselor from Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7 to 0.
Item number 5.
Item number 5, public hearing on applications for a new liquor license and a special amusement permit for live entertainment for Cowbell Grill and Tap LLC, 49 Lisbon Street. Requested action to authorize the city clerk's office to approve a new liquor license application and special amusement permit for Cowbell Grill and Tap LLC, 49 Lisbon Street.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Counselor Lyson, seconded by Counselor Cloutier. Discussion on the council. Counselor Lyson.
Yes, more cowbell.
Okay. To the public. And back to the Ed.
Just one point of information that something is going to be coming forward related to this item. Their business model includes delivery, food delivery, so people can call in and have the food delivered to them. In order to make that work, they have approached us about getting permits for 2 on-street parking spaces on Canal Street to be used for their delivery personnel. It's an area that doesn't have a lot of parking demand at the moment. So it's our impression and our recommendation that that would be workable to allow this to go forward. It will require that we change our ordinance because we don't have a provision in our parking ordinance for on-street permits. So it's going to take us a little bit of time, but I wanted to be able to report back to them that that is something the council would likely support.
Okay. Call the roll.
Counselor from Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
And Ward 4?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7 to 0.
Item number 6.
Item number 6, public hearing on the renewal application for a special amusement permit for live entertainment for LBK Events, 1 Bates Street. Requested action to grant a special amusement permit for live entertainment for LBK Events, 1 Bates Street.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Counselor Lyson, seconded by Counselor LaJoy. Discussion on the council. Public. Back to the council. Call the roll.
Counselor from Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Abstain.
Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 6 to 0.
Number 7.
Item number 7, public hearing on the renewal application for a special amusement permit for live entertainment for Fishbones American Grill, 70 Lincoln Street. Requested action to grant a special amusement permit for live entertainment to Fishbones American Grill, 70 Lincoln Street.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Counselor Lyson, seconded by Counselor Ray. Questions from the council? Public? Back to the council? Call the roll.
Counselor from Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
And item 8.
Item number 8, ordinance amending the Code of Ordinances, Article 15, medical marijuana, distribution and cultivation, to remove references to registered dispensaries and clarify that the city has not opted in under state law to authorize registered caregiver retail stores, registered dispensaries, marijuana testing facilities, or marijuana manufacturing facilities. Requested action that the proposed ordinance amendment to remove references to registered dispensaries and clarify that the city has not opted in under state law to authorize registered caregiver retail stores, registered dispensaries, marijuana testing facilities, or marijuana manufacturing facilities receive first passage by a roll call vote, and that the public hearing be continued to the next regularly scheduled city council meeting.
So moved.
Second. Motion by Counselor Ray, seconded by Counselor LaJoy. Discussion on the council. Counselor Lyson?
So Ed, could you explain what kind of approval was already granted to some of these facilities now that we're not opting into? So it's kind of a...
Yes, under the newly adopted state laws, number one, we cannot restrict medical marijuana caregivers. So they will continue to be able to come in and be licensed as caregivers. We can, however, restrict medical marijuana retail stores. That is something that developed as the medical marijuana proposal was implemented, that I think was not anticipated by the initial state law, but the state allowed it. We have somewhere between 12 and 15.
Yeah, 12 and 15.
Pardon me? Well, why don't you explain what we have?
And that, actually, there's a map in your package here, and on the, looks like this, and it has a table on it, and it has a list of what we have for grow operations, 15 grow operations, 2 grow and retail locations, 15 just retail. And of that, 9 are pending. That was as of the 14th. Some of those folks have actually had their license issued since then. But altogether, we potentially have 32 known licensed legal establishments in the community.
And they would all be grandfathered, so anything, if they are actually licensed and operating by the 13th of December, they would all be grandfathered under going forward. What this ordinance does is, first, it eliminates any reference in our code to registered dispensaries, because didn't want people to be confused that we had actually authorized them when we hadn't, because the new law requires us to take action after the 13th to authorize them. It cleans up some of the definitions to make them match more closely with the state law. There is some language in here that establishes a minimum, at least some odor limitation requirement on marijuana caregivers and retail shops that has not been present in our ordinance before. That's an attempt to address what is usually the most frequent complaint that we've heard about marijuana operations. And then the most important part is the very end of the ordinance, where we basically have a section that says, notwithstanding any other provision of the City Code of Ordinances, the city has not opted in under state law to authorize any registered caregiver retail store, dispensaries, marijuana testing facilities, or marijuana manufacturing facilities prior to and after December 13th, 2018, except as specifically permitted under a permit issued by the city prior to November 20th, 2018, or as specifically authorized by ordinance on or after December 13th, 2018. So basically, we're just stating for the record that we have not yet opted in on anything. Doesn't mean that we won't, doesn't mean that we will. It's something that the council will have to come back to and revisit. And I anticipate that in the new year, early in the new year, we'll start dealing with some of those issues. And it might even be to some extent by a use-by-use basis to see if we can't at least get some consensus on how to go forward.
Okay. Sorry. And to the public? Back to the council. Call the roll.
Counsel from Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6? Yes. Ward 7?
Yes.
Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes?
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Agenda item number 9.
Item number 9, ordinance amending the Code of Ordinances, Chapter 18, Building and Building Regulations, Article 3, Property Maintenance Code, Chapter 3, General Requirements, Weeds. Requested action that the proposed ordinance amendment to extend the existing prohibition on tall weeds in certain zoning districts to additional districts receive first passage by a roll call vote, and that the public hearing be continued to the next regularly scheduled city council meeting.
So move. Second.
Motion by Counselor Marcotte, seconded by Counselor Lyson. Discussion on the council? Public? Back to the council? And call the roll.
Counselor from Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
And Ward 4?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Agenda item number 10.
Item number 10, ordinance amending Appendix A zoning and land use code, Article 11, District Regulations, Section 6, Neighborhood Conservation A District. Requested action, that the proposed amendment amending Appendix A zoning and land use code, District 11, District Regulations, Section 6, Neighborhood Conservation A District, receive first passage by a roll call vote, be referred to the planning board for a recommendation, and that the public hearing be continued to the next regularly scheduled city council meeting following receipt of the planning board's recommendation.
So move.
Second.
Motion by Counselor LaJoy, seconded by Counselor Pettingill. And discussion on the council. To the public? Back to the council? Call the roll.
Counselor from Ward 5?
No.
Ward 6?
No.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Ward 1?
No.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
No.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Motion failed, received a vote of 3-4.
Agenda item number 12.
Item number 12. Item number 12, resolve authorizing the transfer of $52,000 from the AL Airport tractor purchase to purchase a V-plow and a compact tractor for the airport. Requested action, to approve the resolve authorizing the transfer of $52,000 from the AL Airport tractor purchase to purchase a V-plow and a compact tractor for the airport.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Counselor Cloutier, seconded by Counselor Ray. Discussion on the council. Public. Back to the council. And call the roll.
Counselor from Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Agenda item number 13.
Item number 13, resolve accepting and appropriating the fiscal year 2018 Homeland Security Grant Award of $172,782. Requested action, to adopt the resolve accepting and appropriating the fiscal year 2018 Homeland Security Grant Award of $172,782.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Counselor Cloutier, seconded by Counselor Ray. Discussion on the council. Public. Back to the council. Call the roll.
Counselor from Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
And Ward 4.
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Agenda item number 14.
Item number 14, resolve approving an extension of the agreement with LWS Development for the purchase and sale of real estate at 188 Lincoln Street. Requested action, to approve the resolve approving an extension of the agreement with LWS Development for the purchase and sale of real estate at 188 Lincoln Street.
Yeah, so moved.
Second.
Motion by Counselor Cloutier, seconded by Counselor Lyson. Discussion on the council.
I'd like Lincoln to give us an update, if possible.
Absolutely.
Sure, thank you. This has been a long time coming, and they've been working with Portland Pie since last spring and ultimately came to terms with them. I've got a copy of their lease agreement with them. It is a 5-year initial lease with 2 5-year options. I think it'll be next summer by the time they do all the renovation to the building and then have the renovations for the tenant fit out for Portland Pie. It'll probably be middle to late summer before Portland Pie is up and running. But at this point, they've got what they needed to go to the banks, that they've got a viable tenant who's well-known, has owned several operations, and they're going forward. So it's exciting. They will be back to the city looking for support, about $150,000 worth of loans and grants through our typical programs, which we'll need to tweak a little bit because it's outside of the district we normally operate in. But we talked about this when we originally agreed to do this with the developers. So pretty excited about this because it did take a while for it all come together, but it is moving.
Okay. Councilor Marcotte?
I'm going to be consistent on this item, especially since we've seen extension after extension, that this was not the best and highest use for that parcel, and dismayed that we're even looking at giving away some free and low-interest money to make this happen as well, that this is not just a case of free enterprise coming in because they see a great opportunity. So I will be voting against this.
Okay, anyone else on the council? Call the roll.
Counselor from Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
No.
Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes?
Ward 3?
Yes.
Word 4?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 6 to 1.
Okay, reports and updates. I understand Councilor Ray has two for us.
Yes, let me find them. Okay, great. So as a member of the Lake Auburn Water Protection Commission, I just wanted to let everyone know the water remains at a safe level for drinking and consumption. Similar to 2013, Cyanura bacteria is algae is currently blooming, and that is making the water taste like cucumbers for a lot of people. So
It's like being at a spa.
it's like being at a spa, correct. It's very relaxing water. For school committee, a couple things that are going on right now. We've been discussing our snow day policies, which feels
Relevant.
Yes,
relevant, but way too early. One thing we discussed last night was an early release option. Students, staff, parents, and community members have been surveyed on this in the past, the most recent survey being 2015. And so we were provided with a lot of those qualitative results last night, which was really helpful in informing where we're starting to go with that discussion. The other thing discussed last night that I thought you folks would be interested in is the Great Falls Regional Service Center. This was approved by the city, by the school committee and the voters, and it gained us an extra subsidy from the state and is also attempting to identify savings by working as a center with 3 other districts. Savings have come in the form of substitute software. We've gotten a $16,000 reimbursement as a result of our collaboration. The center has provided each district with $9,000 for security consultant work. And we intend to use that in a specific way that I didn't write down. And then we've been sharing a weather consultant, again, very relevant, but it helps us to make better predictions about closings and delays.
Excellent. Councilor Cloutier.
Just on your report about early release days, the conversation that we had when I was the school committee rep was around whether or not we had enough after-school programs to accommodate. And I just want to say that as a parent of somebody in the elementary school system, the system that we have in place for the half-day Wednesdays works really, really well. And so if that could be a model, that might be something to think about.
Could you explain that, Chris?
So my child goes to the YWCA after-school program, and on early release Wednesdays, they just bus them over there earlier than they normally would.
Nice.
So if that could happen on snow days, which we hope isn't more than, 10 days
1,000.
a year, that could be a good model to use.
I would say the one thing that came up that surprised me was early release of students is also early release of teachers at the same time. And so there is some concern about getting folks, children on buses to
That's
go to
fair.
programs like that. So we definitely should consider how that program works. And if they're not under the teacher contract, if maybe that, I don't know. But good to consider.
Good point.
I
I didn't
think
think about
another part that we talked about was blizzard bags, which some schools have taken up sending home. It's just work to do at home. We definitely want to avoid digital homework because not everyone has access to internet in their home or to a way to access the internet. It also might become the same situation with paper homework, that it's not relevant to the curriculum at that point in time. So is it really, enhancing their work? But I think some folks would also argue is going to school on June 25th going to enhance their work and learning. So we've got a lot to discuss, but I really appreciate the feedback like that. Thank you.
Councilor Marcotte.
Just a follow-up question. When you mentioned not having internet access, it made me think of the laptop program. Where is that at these days?
So Councilor Pettengill asked me the same thing earlier. It is not equitable for every student, is what I would.
Elementary
some-
school students don't have.
Elementary doesn't,
A
okay.
couple classrooms might have take-home hardware at this point, but not every classroom, no.
It would be just on a sign-out basis. But is it the the middle school and the high school has it as standard
Yes,
that every student gets one?
yes.
Oh.
And then elementary, I don't know how they.
Mine have a
work it
couple in
out,
the
but
classroom that they
Yeah.
might be able to sign out.
It's not one-to-one.
Okay, thank you.
One other thing too with that though, with, why I was asking about the laptops is that, because we're in Maine, power outages sometimes go hand in hand with why students aren't in school, so then you've got either no power or no internet if they do have access to power, so that can play a hand in it. And my comment was, the blizzard bags, we have a, is it charter school, Acadia?
Yes.
Yeah, that does the blizzard bags, and I happened to get a hold of one last week. The question about whether or not the work is applicable, the nice thing is it's the equivalent of sub-plans that are made in September that don't get used until January. It doesn't fit what's going on with the scope of the curriculum anyway, but it's still keeping students engaged and learning. You know, and more to your point about not being engaged in the summertime, it still keeps them active, still keeps them thinking. I was reading about a program that they may require them to go to a local event that's happening, attend a play. So there's more options, and it actually fits into the broader scope of the arts that we had here earlier, of getting kids out in our community, getting them engaged, because it can happen at any point. It doesn't necessarily have to be that day. So let's look at the cost savings of it, and think outside the box a little bit for this.
We'll take that back.
Okay. Any other business councilors may have? Councilor Cloutier.
So, agenda item 10, which was the NCA rezoning. In our previous conversations around that, we had also talked about accessory dwelling units as part of that, and I had asked that those be separated out, and they were, and I really appreciate that. But I hope we're going to come back to the accessory dwelling unit topic at some point.
I will pass that along to Dave and the planning board.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I reminded me that I also wanted to bring up with respect to the NCA, I think that it was agreed upon that there are some sections that are currently zoned NCA that don't really meet the criteria, and I'd like staff to take a look at that a little bit more and maybe eliminate some of those NCA areas and either rezone them something more appropriately. I know a lot, I don't know what percentage it was, but there was many areas that David showed us that he said, I don't think this really meets the NCA criteria. So I think that's something we need to do as we update our zoning.
At one point, we had talked about the possibility of doing an overlay that would have differentiated between the areas of the NCA that duplexes would and would not be allowed. We can certainly go back and revisit that. There are clearly parts of the NCA that have almost no duplexes or multifamily properties in them at all. Others, there are clusters of them. So we can take a look at that again. It gets a little, it's probably easier to identify the areas that are massively single-family than it is to identify where to break the boundaries between areas that have more multifamily and those that have fewer. But we can certainly take a look at it.
So can I ask a question just sort of about like zoning, I guess, in general? So why would we do what we're calling an overlay as opposed to sort of reassigning the pieces of that zone to something else that it fits better within? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, the notion
Is
of
it basically the same thing?
Pretty much. The notion of the overlay is that everything in the NCA district would stay the same in terms of lot size and all of those kinds of things. The only thing that would change is the area where a duplex would and wouldn't be allowed. So, I mean, you could either do it as an overlay or you could do it as like NCA 1 and NCA 2 or something like that, just to differentiate. It's just a differentiation. It's basically where duplexes would and wouldn't be allowed.
But it's not like there are parts of current NCA that would fit into like NCB or,
Well, I don't think there would be very many, because most of the biggest distinction between NCA and, what is it? Suburban residential?
yeah.
Or medium-density residential.
Medium-density residential. The biggest difference between those two is lot size, I believe.
Okay.
And the majority of the areas that are NCA are pretty small lot. May not all be, and it might be worth taking a look at that to see if some areas should just be slid into a lower density zone.
I think David had pointed that out in his presentations, that there were some areas. I just think that ought to be looked at, so.
Okay,
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
all right. All in favor?
It's the most tentative motion.